And a great good afternoon to you. John Verlin, On-Demand Advertising Solutions with Digital Marketing Update. This is podcast number 92. And I noticed a really interesting post that was on Entrepreneur the other day. I wanted to make a comment about it. It was written by a gentleman by the name of, I believe it's Chidiki Samuelson. And he's a guest writer. He's an entrepreneur, lawyer, freelance writer. And he talks about something that we've talked about before in these podcasts. But if you've got a service business like I do, how do you brand that for success compared to, say, a business that has a product? Service businesses are different because of a number of reasons, but the trust of the prospect is crucial. And with online platforms today, that can be accomplished in a number of ways, but at the same time, it can also be a double-edged sword because you can end up, getting negative comments and you have to answer those one way or the other. And speaking of sword, if you noticed on this post, I've got a picture of a sword. That is the famed Viking-era Ubrecht sword, and it's considered historically, as I understand it, one of the first logos the archaeologists have found from any civilization. This is a person, I guess, named Ubrecht who crafted a sword. Maybe it was custom made. I don't know if they mass produced them or what, whatever Vikings did, but put his logo on it to distinguish himself. How many swordsmiths were in business back then? I don't know. And this may have been a creative way to stand out so future Viking warriors would come back when they lost their sword or used it or broke it to get another sword made by Ubrecht. So, not that he was a product per se, but he was branding himself with a logo. And that goes back to, I guess it's like 800 AD or whatever it was. So, it's different than if you just made a product. In this case, I would imagine it was custom made, but it was a skill that this person had to make those swords the way they did and branded themselves with a logo. Okay, so he talks about in his post about the fact that normally if you buy a product, you're loyal to the business. You appreciate it, and you appreciate the quality of the product, and you usually spread word of mouth, whatever, to show how much you like it. Well, if you're a service business, that's different because you are the brand. You, the person that offered the service, are considered the brand. So how are you branding yourself to make your service stand out and make it have what he calls fidelity, so that people will be loyal to your brand? And he also indicates, and this is true, service businesses are also, he calls them sitting ducks for litigation and a plethora of complaints. And that can very easily tear the brand apart. Just look at, a number of cases, I think of Facebook off the top, of data leakage with Cambridge Analytics and whatever, and it just, people delete Facebook. They're upset because their data was leaked. And that's an example that could be open them to litigation and destroy their brand. And I'm sure they've taken a number of hits. They have taken a number of hits on over the last year or so based on sharing data and being hacked, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be a real issue that you have as a service business owner be aware of, the fact that you could be being targeted, so to speak, and being aimed at. He goes on to really talk about four main points. One is, he says, to have a feedback system for both positive and negative feedback. And we've talked about this before. Doing email follow-ups, and you've seen this a lot with Amazon, where you get an email, would you rate this experience? Did you like everything? This is becoming more and more critical, not just from a marketing standpoint, but from this branding standpoint, that you're on top of things, that you care about the customer, and more importantly, if you've just offered a service. You've contacted them, you followed up, because they can go on at any moment on Facebook and complain about you, or any Indeed or Glassdoor, and I've seen some this past week about a business that was not too favorable in my local market. So have a system for feedback, positive and negative, that you can respond to. And he indicates in his post that this can prevent possibly litigation, as a lot of companies, they if they don't have a system in place to answer the complaints, people can sue them, and they're not on top of the thing here, getting ahead of the game, so to speak, to prevent that. So develop a system for getting back in touch with customers after the sale. Stay in touch, be consistent with it, because once it goes online in a negative format, you're fighting to put out a fire that can affect all sorts of other customers. He says to also treat your data as gold, and he's talking about the data of your customers. Usually you'll have a privacy policy, that you talk about how you're going to handle their information. And he comments about the Yahoo breach. I just mentioned Facebook's being hacked and using data. This can wreck not only the litigation end of this thing as a service business, but it can wreck the brand's trust, because people are buying you. You are the brand. You are the logo image of what you do. And if you don't treat that as such and you abuse that trust, it can come back and bite you in a whole number of ways. Or your staff, if they're not trustworthy, if they are careless or in contempt of the customer or anything, bad customer service, anything can open that door up for on down the road problems through spread of social media negativity or actual lawsuits of any kind. So definitely treat the data they give you as very precious. The third point he makes is to concentrate more on personal branding than corporate branding. And we've talked about this in a number of podcasts, that people buy you, not a product. You are the product. So building the trust is so critical. And one way of doing that we've talked about is podcasting, is building that one-on-one rapport, because they can hear you, listen to you, feel like they know you. And isn't that what happens, one of the early stages of building that trust? And because of setting this trust up and using unique ways of doing it, it's so important to building that personal brand, because people want to do business with people they trust, not some corporate image, and it humanizes you. That's a big thing. When I mess up on a podcast or do something silly or something and people get a chuckle out of it, that humanizes me. They think, well, this guy sounds like a real guy. He doesn't sound like a robot, because we're getting too many of those in our interactions through social media and through platforms. We need that humanization, and it lets the prospects know you're real. The next point he brings out, besides building and humanizing your brand, is to understand, he calls the three rules of customer attraction and retention. And he talks about conventional advertising, social media advertising, and what he calls social impact advertising. That's setting up, that's social, it's carrying out deliberate efforts, he says, to have a positive societal impact. For example, I'm thinking you could do, if you do a fundraiser and promote it on social media for your community at large, to have raise money for the Humane Society or the local animal shelter, or something along that line, to tie in with a charity. We used to do this all the time with radio, to tie in promoting on radio an event that you would have at your business to help raise money, partnering with the local animal shelter, things like that. I'm going to call those kind of special promotions that have a societal impact. But those are deliberate efforts. He says social impact advertising, that can end up giving a very favorable image to your brand. And you need to have consistency, he says. We've talked about this. The consistency is not relevant if you've got a weak brand. But if you have developed a strong personal brand, efforts should be put towards maintaining that brand through consistency of customer interactions and consistency of your information you're sharing, such as podcasts. That's why I do it every week, and I promote it every week relentlessly, because that shows an online presence on a regular basis. Otherwise, once you build that up and they don't hear from you after a while, what do you think they're thinking? Are they out of business? What happened to them? Did they go on a vacation? I mean, it's critical because that consistency has been so critical because the fine line between doing business with you or another service business just might be the fact that they've heard from you on a regular basis. Meaning if they're following your blog, if they're seeing responses on Facebook or even Twitter or Instagram, photos you've put up or videos. All of that is building the brand because it's what media do and have always done with advertising. You consistently see a commercial and you feel like you know that brand now. How many times have you said to somebody, "Oh, it's nice to meet you. I feel like I know you because I've seen your post all the time on social media"? It's the same thing when people say, "I've seen your TV ad, I've seen your magazine ad," that kind of thing. And then finally, he says, and I like the way he phrases this, how you say it is more important than what you say. I've talked about this in the past, brand image, brand currency, your online image, things like that. It's how you say something. I think of Schindler's List, where Schindler talked about the presentation, how he would dine these Nazis and dress up and be fancy businessman. It was the presentation of himself to get these Nazis to want to do business with him. So how you say it is more important than really what you say. That's why I advocate animated videos and podcasting. Why? Because businesses typically don't do that. It's a unique way of presenting yourself. And it also, he talks about your tone and content is important in this, of how they perceive the way you're presenting yourself. Do you see the difference in this? And so that's why how you say something many times is more important than what you're saying. Why? Because everybody in the same business may say the same things, but it's how they present it that's different and unique. Not just an offer, but the way they're presenting it, like podcasting or like animated videos. That's why I focus on those, because it helps separate your business from the competition, because they're not doing that as readily. Great to have you with us today. John Verlin, 12@AT&T.net is my email. OnDemandAdvertisingSolutions.com is the website. If you have any questions or comments, love to hear from you, and we'll talk to you again soon.